Hi there, I'm Anna, a naturalist here at Up Yonder Farm Environmental Education Center.
And I'm Rick, also a naturalist, and we're here on our sugar trail at the base of our lower sugar bush to demonstrate how we tap our maple trees.
Today we're going to show you just a few of the tools that we're using to tap our trees, so I'm going to go through those very briefly. Right here we have a power drill, and this will be used for drilling the hole in the tree.
After we drill the hole, we'll use this flat-bladed screwdriver to clean out any sawdust so that it doesn't get caught on our spout.
Right here we have one of the small plastic spouts that we'll be using. You can see one end is a little bit narrower than the other end, and this is the end that's going to attach to the plug, and this narrow end is the one that we'll be putting into the tree.
And to be able to get that into the tree properly, we've got a hammer. All right, as we go to start the tapping experience, we've got to have our drill, and we need to make sure that our hole is going to be able to be reached by our sap line. So I want to avoid any holes that I've used in this tree before. A tree of this size can only have one tap into it. As it gets a little bigger, we could put 2 taps in. So I'll find a spot where that tap line can reach. I'm going to angle my hole slightly down because we're using gravity to pull this out, and then just one small hole right here.
Now that Rick has drilled this hole in our tree, I'm going to clean out some of the wood shavings. So I have 2 different tools with me that I might like to use. The first is a screwdriver and the second is a dowel. So I'm going to get in there with a screwdriver and just clean out any of the stuff that's right near the surface. And then I'm going to go in with the dowel and clean out any remnants that are a little bit deeper in this hole there, just to make sure it's nice and clean when we put that tap in.
Our third step is to take our spout and our hammer, get that into position onto that cleaned hole, and just tap, tap, tap. We don't want to tap it in there too far, just enough. Tapping it in there too far makes it difficult for us to remove it at the end of the season. Once we've got that tap in there, we can take our sap line, attach the sap line right to the tap, and we'll see that that sap will start flowing down this tube right into this tube, which is going to go into our large collection vessel. You'll notice as we look up the hill over here, all of our maple trees are interconnected. We use gravity to feed all of our sap down so that we don't use any pumps. So all of the sap from the trees at the top of the rise here will flow down this hill, down through these lines, right into this collection vessel, where we'll then move it up to the sugar house for the next step.
Right here, I have a story written by Doug George Canentio in Akwesasne, Mohawk. This story is entitled How the Creator Gave the Maple Tree to the People. It was the Iroquois who invented maple syrup and the technology which went into taking sap and making it into that most delicious of sweeteners. It is the maple which tells us that spring has come and it is time to celebrate. To begin, they tell their children the following story. At one time, long ago, the Creator came to realize that the long winters of this land meant the health and well-being of the people suffered. They would become physically ill and their spirits would be sad. Many months would pass since they had fresh food, and deep snows meant hunting was also difficult. Something had to be done. The Creator went back to the people and said he would give them a special gift. The Creator would go to the maple trees and ask them to share their blood at a certain time so the people could come and be nourished and be made happy by drinking directly from the tree. They would only have to insert sumac tubes beyond the outer bark of the tree, and pure syrup would flow. The people did so and were made stronger in body and mind. The Creator was pleased with this and then left the earth to attend to other worlds. He was gone a long time. While he was away, he wondered about the human beings and how they were doing with the gift he had given to them. He decided to return to Earth and to the Iroquois village where he had taught them how to obtain syrup. When he arrived, he saw that the longhouses were empty of people, that there were no hearth fires, no children playing about, and no dogs barking. He did see dog and human footprints in the snow, which went in a single direction towards a grove of maple trees. He followed the tracks and came about an amazing sight. There, lying prone beneath the branches of the trees, were the people with long sumac tubes extended from the maples to their mouths. So great was their desire for the pure maple syrup that they had forsaken all of their normal duties, including the care of their homes and their own children. The Creator also noticed that the dogs were also using the tubes to drink the sweet water with their paws waving in the air. This was not good. The Creator awakened the people and brought them together. He said that since they had abused his gift, they would have to work to make the syrup. He told them that no longer would syrup flow directly from the trees, but they would have to use taps and then prepare to heat the sap over many hours and watch it very carefully until, with labor and care, it became maple syrup. They would also have to hold a ceremony of thanksgiving for the maples, by which they would not only ask for this gift, but express their gratitude directly to the trees. This is how maple syrup came about, one of the many things developed by the Iroquois and shared with the world. It is also one of the 13 ceremonies the Iroquois hold to this day to mark the lunar years and to celebrate the blessings of life. Native Americans would have used different tools than the ones we use today to make their maple syrup. The first we have is a wooden tap. This would have been made out of a hollowed out branch, just like this. Some possible woods they would have used were sumac or elderberry, something soft and pithy where they could have easily removed the inner portion. Then from there, they would have taken these wooden taps and put them into trees, just like this one is here. Baskets like this one made out of birch bark or maybe elm would have been used to collect the sap. From there, they would take the sap in these baskets and transfer it into a large hollowed out log like this. Now from here, the process gets a little bit different from what we're used to. To heat up the sap, today we use fires and evaporators, but they would have used hot rocks. So obviously they wouldn't have used their hands, but this isn't hot, so I'm gonna go ahead and touch it. And they would have taken these hot rocks and put them into the wooden troughs. That heats up the sap, and then as the rocks cool, they would take them out, put them back in the fire, and replace them with more warm rocks. Now, they wouldn't make maple syrup. They would continue on that process and make maple sugar. So the sugar is a little bit easier to store and transport, which is why they made the sugar instead of the syrup. Back in the days, before we used things like lines to tap the trees, people would use big metal buckets like these. So on this tree, we're going to be demonstrating what it looks like to tap a tree with one of these buckets attached to it instead of one of the sap lines. So now that we've drilled the hole in this tree, I'm gonna clean out some of the wood shavings. So again, I'm gonna use the dowel or the screwdriver, probably the screwdriver first and then the dowel. So I'm gonna get in there, kind of twist around a little bit, free up some of those shavings and kind of brush them out. And then I'm gonna go in with the dowel and do the same thing. All right. Now, once that hole is clean, I'm going to take the spile and tap it in. But you'll notice that this one looks a little bit different than the one we used before. So this one, this is the end that's going to go in the tree, and I'm just gonna go up to where it starts to get a little bit thicker here. And then you'll notice here that this is kind of like a U-shaped, and this is where the sap's going to drip out. And this one is different because we're not attaching it to a sap line, we'll be attaching it to this bucket. So once I have this in the tree, it'll hook onto the bucket just like this. So right now, I'm gonna take my hammer and I'm going to tap it in. So I'm gonna try and angle it just right here. And I'm gonna tap it in just so that thick part is just nestled into the tree. Then, I'm gonna take this big sap bucket and I'm gonna hook it on the tree. Lastly, I'm gonna go get a little hat or dome for the top of this bucket to keep anything from falling in. We don't want any snow or debris getting in there because that wouldn't taste good in our maple syrup. So I have this little metal hat and it just slides over the bucket just like that. So now all of the sap that we collect will be nice and protected from the elements.
The early colonists learned a lot about maple sugaring from the Native Americans. They took their technology and improved upon the procedure. What we see here is they've taken, instead of an old wooden tap, they've used a nice iron spile. The iron allowed it to be a much smaller hole and also a much stronger place where they could hang a bucket from to collect all of the maple sap. Similar to the Native Americans, the early colonists also used snowshoes to travel through the woods to go collect the sap from all the trees. Snowshoes were essential in this point because as they were using the much larger sap buckets than the Native Americans' small birch bark containers, they needed that extra footing to kind of get them through the woods. They also incorporated their technology into the boiling this time. Right here we've got a setup that shows just two of what would have been a 3-pot system. Each pot would have been over an open fire, and the cool sap would have been ladled into the first pot where it would have been heated up and started to boil. As that boiled down, it would have been moved to a second pot and then into a third, each one removing a little bit more water. We were still in a maple sugaring process because sugar was much easier to transport at this period of time because there wasn't the widespread availability of glass to store syrup in. So oftentimes that sap was cooked right down to sugar, which was much easier to transport and trade. Here at Up Yonda Farm, we use a little bit more of a modern method to move our sap from our sugar bush out to our sugar house. If we look up the hill here, all of our maple trees are connected to this one main blue line. This main blue line comes down the hill and is fed into the 65-gallon container. This means we don't have to go from tree to tree emptying buckets. We can let gravity do all of the work and bring that sap down so that we can transport it over to our sugar house. Other commercial operations or other operations might use mechanical pumps or even vacuum pumps to move that sap a little bit more efficiently.
Right here are some of the tools that we use in modern day sugaring. The first one we have here is a filter, and it's kind of like a thin fabric. It's got a hole at the top and is closed off at the bottom, and we use this to filter out any of the bigger stuff that might have gotten into our sap. Things like leaves or pine needles or maybe even bugs that we don't want to be eating in our sap. So we pour it through this before we take the finished product that comes out and put it in the evaporator behind me. Our next tool is a candy thermometer. Both maple sap and nearly finished maple syrup have to be heated to very specific temperatures, and using a thermometer like this one helps us tell how close we are to those temperatures. This is a jug and hydrometer. So we fill the jug full of maple syrup and then we place the hydrometer on top. The hydrometer will float or sink, and how high it is depends on the sugar content in the maple syrup. So this will tell us how dense that sugar is and if we're close to maple syrup. These two tools here are called skimmers, and I'll show you them in just a moment. So sometimes when sap comes out of the tree, bacteria starts to grow. And we don't want to be eating that. And as soon as that bacteria gets put in the evaporator, it dies and it starts to foam up in this white foamy stuff. So we use these two tools to take that out and discard it. So this one is just grated. So you'll see that my hand is able to pass behind it. This will allow the sap to go through it. This skimmer is not grated. So this doesn't allow any sap to go through it. And we use both of these to kind of scoop up the foam and discard it later. Right here I have two grading kits. This is our first one, and this one is a little bit older but still works great. So there in here are their different jugs of maple syrup, and you'll see that there's different amounts of light that's passing through. Now the amount of light that's passing through will tell us what grade it is. Dark, light, medium, amber. Those are all terms that we use to describe the color of the syrup, which does have a slight taste difference that corresponds with it. We also have a new digital grater here. So with this, first we calibrate it, so we make sure that the machine is reading correctly, and then we pop open the cover, take a bottle of our own maple syrup, just a glass bottle full of our own maple syrup. We'll pop it in, close the cover, and this machine will tell us what percentage of light is able to pass through, and from that we'll be able to scientifically tell what grade of maple syrup it is. Lastly, this might be the most important tool in modern sugaring, and this is a jug. So this is what we put our finished product in, and might be something that you're familiar with if you enjoy fresh maple syrup on your pancakes and waffles.
After we've gone through all the trouble of collecting the sap from the trees, we need to keep it safe until it's time to put into our evaporator. So we've created some natural refrigerators by packing some snow around 150-gallon containers. This way, any bacteria that's naturally in the sap won't allow to grow, and it's going to stay nice and cold until we're ready to use it. We'll put it in through here, but to get it out, that's another story. We use a small pond pump like this to pump that liquid inside the sugar house to get it into the evaporator. Once I pump that in, all of that sap is going to go down into a bucket like this. I'll be able to take all of that sap and bring it over here to the evaporator. But we don't want to put ice cold sap into boiling sap that's already going and turning into syrup. So what we'll do is we'll pour this into the warming pan. As we look at the warming pan here, you can see that I've got a little bit of filter up on top. This is to catch any of the sediment, any bugs or needles or leaves that might be in the sap. Catch that before it goes down into the evaporator. As this pan warms, I'll be able to open this up and allow some of that liquid to join the already boiling liquid. If you join me over here, we can see that there's many channels through here. These channels allow for that sap to warm at different rates and to boil at different rates. And eventually, when we've got it boiled down and brought enough water off, we'll be able to start taking that finished product right off over here. We go through a secondary filter, so I've got a filter very similar to the one up here in the warming pan, along with a cloth filter, and I'll slowly let this drip out and collect everything in this plastic bucket down here. Once we've collected enough of the finished product off the evaporator, we'll be able to put it into our finisher, warm it up to 217, 218 degrees, and when that consistency is just right, when we've got just the perfect sugar content, we'll be able to open this up and put it into these small jugs. Pop the top on, and once the top's on, turn it upside down so that that hot liquid comes in contact with the cap and pasteurizes it so that any material that doesn't belong in there is cooked off quickly. And then we've got our syrup already popped.